The morning mist clung to the windows of Clarence's house as Camilla Parker Bowles adjusted her pearl necklace one final time before the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who had weathered decades of public scrutiny, her face bearing the lines of someone who had fought for her place in the most scrutinized family in the world. Today felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. The weight of the crown jewels in the private vault below seemed heavier somehow, as if the spirits of Queen's past were whispering warnings she couldn't quite hear. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had been with Scotland Yard for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for the call that came at 6:30 that morning. Her superior's voice was tense as he briefed her on what would become the most sensitive investigation of her career. Anonymous tips had been flooding in for weeks about irregularities in the royal collection, specifically concerning items that should have been transferred to the Crown Estate following Queen Elizabeth II's death 6 months prior. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the confidential documents spread across her desk. Photographs of missing artifacts, detailed inventories, and witness statements painted a picture that made her stomach turn. The late Queen's personal collection, items that held not just monetary value, but centuries of British heritage, appeared to have been systematically diverted from their rightful place in the royal archives. The investigation had begun 3 weeks earlier when Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, the royal collection's head curator, noticed discrepancies during the routine cataloging following the Queen's passing. Eleanor was a meticulous woman in her 50s, whose entire life had been devoted to preserving royal history. She had worked closely with Queen Elizabeth II for over 2 decades, earning the monarch's trust through her unwavering dedication and encyclopedic knowledge of royal artifacts. Eleanor's discovery started with something seemingly insignificant, a missing brooch that the Queen had worn to her Diamond Jubilee celebration. The piece, crafted in 1897 for Queen Victoria's own Jubilee, was listed in the official inventory, but nowhere to be found in the secured vaults. What began as a simple search for a misplaced item soon revealed a pattern of missing pieces, all items that the Queen had frequently worn or displayed in her private apartments. The weight of her discovery kept Eleanor awake for nights. She had always prided herself on maintaining absolute discretion regarding royal affairs, but this was different. This wasn't about protecting family privacy or maintaining dignity. This was about the systematic theft of Britain's heritage. After much internal struggle, she had made the decision to contact Scotland Yard through official channels, ensuring that her report would reach the highest levels of law enforcement. Meanwhile, in the antique districts of London, whispers had been circulating among high-end dealers and private collectors about extraordinary pieces appearing at exclusive auctions. Marcus Weatherby, a dealer who had spent 40 years in the trade, had noticed items that bore striking resemblance to pieces he remembered seeing in royal portraits and official photographs. His trained eye could spot royal provenance from across a room, and lately he had been seeing far too many pieces that made his professional instincts sound alarm bells. Marcus was not one to involve himself in scandal, but his conscience had been weighing heavily on him. He had built his reputation on legitimacy and transparency, and the thought that stolen royal artifacts might be circulating through his professional network made him physically ill. After weeks of internal debate, he had made an anonymous call to Scotland Yard, providing detailed information about specific pieces he had seen and the auction houses where they had appeared. The investigation team assembled by Scotland Yard was small but elite. Besides Detective Inspector Mitchell, the team included Detective Sergeant James Crawford, a specialist in art theft and fraud, and Detective Constable Lisa Wong, whose expertise in digital forensics would prove crucial in tracking the paper trail of the missing items. They worked under a veil of absolute secrecy, knowing that any leak could compromise not just their investigation, but potentially destabilize public trust in the monarchy itself. As Sarah delved deeper into the case, she discovered that the missing items weren't random. They followed a specific pattern. All were pieces that the Queen had kept in her private collection rather than in the official Crown Estate. These were items that held deep personal significance to the monarch, pieces she had inherited from her mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. The theft wasn't just about monetary value. It was about erasing the personal history of the royal family. The investigation led them to examine auction records from several prestigious houses across London and Edinburgh. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 6 months, dozens of items matching the descriptions of missing royal artifacts have been sold through private auctions, many of them organized by intermediaries who seem to specialize in high-value, discreet sales to private collectors. One name appeared repeatedly in their investigation: Helena Thornfield, an auction specialist who had built a reputation for handling the estates of wealthy families with absolute discretion. Helena operated from an elegant townhouse in Mayfair, her clientele consisting of individuals who valued privacy above all else. Her auctions were invitation-only affairs, attended by collectors who preferred to acquire their treasures away from public scrutiny. As the team investigated Helena's recent activities, they discovered that she had been contacted 6 months ago by someone claiming to represent the estate of a recently deceased aristocrat. The seller had provided impeccable documentation for each piece, complete with provenance papers and authenticity certificates. Helena, trusting in her years of experience and the quality of the documentation, had proceeded with organizing several private auctions without question. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Constable Wong discovered digital breadcrumbs that led back to the source of the forged documentation. The certificates of authenticity had been created using letterhead and seals that were nearly perfect replicas of those used by the royal collection. However, Wong's analysis revealed tiny inconsistencies in the digital formatting that suggested the documents had been created on modern software rather than being genuine historical papers. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her as she realized the implications of their discovery. If their suspicions were correct, someone with intimate access to the royal collection had been systematically stealing priceless artifacts and selling them through the private auction market. The level of access required meant that the perpetrator was someone who moved within the inner circles of the royal household. The team's investigation began to focus on individuals who had access to the Queen's private apartments and personal collection. This included not just immediate family members, but also long-serving staff, private secretaries, and other trusted individuals who had been granted access to the monarch's most personal spaces. Each person on their list represented decades of loyal service and absolute trust, making the investigation emotionally complex for everyone involved. As they narrowed their focus, one name began to appear with concerning frequency in their timeline of events. Camilla Parker Bowles had been granted unprecedented access to Queen Elizabeth II's private collection following her marriage to Charles, now King Charles III. As the new queen consort, she had been involved in decisions about which personal items would remain in family hands and which would be transferred to the Crown Estate for public preservation. The team discovered that Camilla had been actively involved in the cataloging process following the Queen's death, working closely with staff to sort through the massive collection of personal items. Her position gave her unique insight into which pieces were being officially documented and which were being handled through private family channels. More troubling, several witnesses reported that Camilla had been observed removing items from the private apartments without following the standard documentation procedures. Sarah's investigation revealed that the thefts had begun almost immediately after Queen Elizabeth II's death, suggesting that the perpetrator had been planning the operation for some time. The careful selection of items and the sophisticated forgery of documentation indicated a level of premeditation that made the crime even more serious. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated plan to systematically loot the royal collection. The emotional impact on the investigation team was profound. These weren't just valuable objects. They were pieces of British history that connected the current royal family to centuries of tradition and heritage. The stolen items included jewelry that had been worn by Queen Victoria, personal gifts exchanged between royal family members, and artifacts that had survived 2 world wars and countless political upheavals. As the evidence mounted, Sarah knew that they were approaching a moment of truth that would shake the foundations of the monarchy. The woman who was now queen consort, the woman who stood beside the king as he navigated the most challenging period of his reign, appeared to be at the center of the most audacious theft in royal history. The irony was not lost on Sarah that the very person entrusted with preserving the queen's legacy appeared to be systematically dismantling it for personal gain. The investigation team worked around the clock, knowing that they were racing against time. Each day that passed meant more artifacts could disappear into private collections around the world, potentially lost forever to the British people. They coordinated with international law enforcement agencies to monitor auction houses in major cities, hoping to intercept any additional stolen pieces before they could be sold. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell continued her work at the Royal Collection, maintaining her normal duties while secretly assisting the police investigation. The strain of keeping such a monumental secret while continuing to work within the royal household was taking its toll on her health and emotional well-being. She had dedicated her life to preserving royal history, and the thought that she might be witnessing its destruction from within was almost unbearable. Marcus Weatherby, the antique dealer whose tip had helped initiate the investigation, found himself struggling with guilt over his role in potentially facilitating the sale of stolen royal artifacts. He had unknowingly authenticated several pieces that he now suspected were part of the theft ring, and the knowledge that his expertise had been exploited to legitimize stolen property haunted his professional conscience. As the investigation progressed, Sarah began to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about stolen jewelry or artwork. It was about the systematic theft of British cultural heritage by someone who had sworn to protect and preserve it. The betrayal was so profound that it threatened to undermine public faith in the institution of monarchy itself. The team prepared for what they knew would be the most difficult phase of their investigation. They had gathered enough evidence to justify seeking search warrants for Clarence House and other royal properties. The logistics of searching royal residences were unprecedented, requiring coordination with palace security, royal protection officers, and government officials at the highest levels. Sarah looked out her office window at the London skyline, knowing that within days, they would either uncover the truth or potentially destroy the reputation of the monarchy in the process. The weight of British history rested on their shoulders, and there would be no going back once they made their move. The next phase of the investigation would determine not just the fate of the stolen artifacts, but the future of the royal family itself. The secure conference room in Scotland Yard had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell sat across from Commissioner Robert Hayes, Palace Security Chief Margaret Thompson, and 3 representatives from the Crown Prosecution Service. The evidence files stacked on the table represented months of painstaking investigation, each document building toward a conclusion that no one in the room wanted to face. Commissioner Hayes adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the final report. His 30-year career had prepared him for many challenging situations, but nothing had prepared him for the possibility of arresting the Queen Consort for theft of royal artifacts. The political and constitutional implications were staggering, requiring coordination at the highest levels of government and the royal household. Margaret Thompson had served as palace security chief for 8 years, working her way up through the ranks of royal protection officers. She had devoted her career to protecting the royal family from external threats, never imagining that she might one day be investigating threats from within. The evidence presented by Detective Inspector Mitchell painted a picture that made her question everything she thought she knew about the people she had sworn to protect. The breakthrough that sealed the case came from an unexpected source. Helena Thornfield, the Mayfair auction specialist, had been approached the previous week by her mysterious client with another collection of items for immediate sale. This time, however, Helena's suspicions had been aroused by the urgency of the request and the extremely high value of the pieces being offered. Helena had contacted her insurance company for additional coverage on the new items, a routine step that proved to be the perpetrator's downfall. The insurance investigator, Michael Barnes, was a former Scotland Yard detective who specialized in art and jewelry theft. When he examined the photographs and documentation for the insurance assessment, he immediately recognized several pieces from the police bulletins that had been circulating among art theft specialists. Michael's call to Scotland Yard had provided the final link in the chain of evidence. The items being prepared for auction matched exactly with artifact from the royal collection that had been reported missing just days earlier. More importantly, the timing of their appearance at Helena's auction house coincided with recent activities at Clarence House, providing investigators with the real-time evidence they needed to make arrests. The logistics of executing search warrants on royal properties required unprecedented coordination. Sarah's team worked with palace security to develop a plan that would minimize disruption while ensuring the integrity of their investigation. They chose to act on a Tuesday morning when most of the royal family would be engaged in official duties elsewhere, reducing the likelihood of confrontation and public spectacle. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell received a coded message that morning, alerting her that the investigation was moving into its final phase. She had spent sleepless nights preparing for this moment, gathering additional documentation and evidence that might support the police investigation. Her hands shook as she unlocked her private files, knowing that the information she had carefully preserved could either vindicate her concerns or destroy the reputation of someone she had been required to work with closely. The morning of the raid, Camilla Parker Bowles was preparing for what she believed would be a routine day of royal duties. Her private secretary had scheduled meetings with charity representatives and a visit to a local hospital. She had no idea that Detective Inspector Mitchell's team was already positioned around Clarence House, coordinating with royal protection officers who had been briefed on the situation just hours earlier. Sarah felt the weight of history as she approached the entrance to Clarence House. The building had housed royalty for generations, its walls containing centuries of secrets and traditions. The thought that she was about to potentially arrest the queen consort within these historic walls was almost surreal. Her team moved with professional precision, each officer aware that their actions would be scrutinized by the highest levels of government and potentially by history itself. The initial entry into Clarence House was conducted with minimal disruption. Palace staff were quietly informed of the situation and asked to gather in a secure area while the search was conducted. Sarah was struck by the professional dignity with which the household staff received the news, their training and discretion evident even in such extraordinary circumstances. Camilla's first indication that something was wrong came when her private secretary appeared at her study door with an expression of barely controlled panic. Behind her stood Detective Inspector Mitchell, warrant in hand, flanked by two other officers. The moment seemed to freeze as the two women looked at each other across the divide between royalty and law enforcement. Sarah had rehearsed this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of confronting someone of Camilla's status. The queen consort's initial reaction was one of genuine confusion, as if she couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. Her questions came in a rapid stream, demanding to know the meaning of the intrusion and insisting that there must be some terrible mistake. The search of Clarence House revealed evidence that exceeded even Sarah's expectations. Hidden in a private study were detailed catalogs of royal artifacts, many with notes indicating their estimated auction values. More damning were receipts and correspondence with Helena Thornfield's auction house, showing a pattern of sales that had generated millions of pounds in revenue over the previous 6 months. Detective Sergeant Crawford made the most significant discovery in a locked filing cabinet in Camilla's private office. Inside were the original authentication documents for dozens of royal artifacts, along with copies of the forged certificates that had been used to sell them at auction. The evidence showed a sophisticated operation that had been planned and executed with careful attention to detail. The emotional impact on the palace staff was profound. Many of them had served the royal family for decades, dedicating their lives to preserving the dignity and integrity of the monarchy. The realization that someone at the highest levels of the royal household had betrayed this trust left many of them in tears. Several longtime staff members requested immediate transfers, unable to continue working in an environment where their fundamental beliefs had been shattered. As the search continued, Sarah's team uncovered evidence that the theft ring extended beyond just Camilla. Financial records showed payments to several individuals who appear to have assisted in identifying valuable items and facilitating their removal from royal properties. The investigation suddenly expanded to include multiple suspects, each of whom would need to be questioned and potentially arrested. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell arrived at Clarence House as the search was underway, having been summoned to assist in identifying specific artifacts and their proper provenance. Walking through rooms where she had once worked to preserve royal history, now seeing them treated as a crime scene, was one of the most difficult experiences of her professional life. Her expertise was crucial in determining which items had been stolen and which might still be recovered. The most heartbreaking discovery came in Camilla's private sitting room, where investigators found Queen Elizabeth II's personal jewelry box nearly empty. The box itself was a family heirloom, given to the late queen by her mother on her 18th birthday. Inside were only a few pieces of modest costume jewelry, while the valuable items that should have been there were gone. For Eleanor, who had often seen the queen wearing pieces from this collection, the empty box represented the personal violation at the heart of the crime. Helena Thornfield was arrested at her Mayfair gallery as Sarah's team executed simultaneous warrants across London. Her initial cooperation with investigators had been based on the belief that she was helping to catch the thieves, not realizing that she would also face charges for her role in facilitating the sales. Her shock was genuine when she learned the true source of the artifact she had been selling, but it did nothing to lessen her legal culpability. The auction house raid revealed additional evidence that painted an even darker picture of the theft operation. Helena's records showed that she had been contacted not just by Camilla, but by several other individuals claiming to represent royal estate matters. The systematic nature of the thefts suggested a coordinated effort involving multiple people with access to royal properties. Marcus Weatherby, the antique dealer whose initial tip had started the investigation, found himself called upon to assist in identifying stolen pieces and evaluating the full scope of the theft ring. His expertise was crucial in determining which items in Helena's inventory were genuine royal artifacts and which might be legitimate pieces from other sources. The experience of examining stolen royal treasures was both fascinating and deeply disturbing for someone who had spent his career respecting the legitimate art market. As news of the arrests began to filter through government channels, the constitutional implications became clear. The monarchy was facing its most serious crisis since the abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936. Palace officials worked frantically to coordinate with government leaders and prepare for the inevitable media storm that would follow any public disclosure of the investigation. King Charles III received the news while conducting official duties in Scotland. The impact on the monarch, who was already struggling to establish his reign following his mother's death, was devastating. The woman he had married despite decades of controversy, the woman he had fought to have accepted by the public and the royal family, stood accused of systematically stealing his mother's most precious possessions. The investigation team worked through the night to process the evidence and prepare for formal charging procedures. Each piece of evidence had to be carefully documented and preserved, knowing that the eventual trial would be subject to unprecedented scrutiny. The legal precedents for prosecuting a member of the royal family were virtually non-existent, requiring coordination between multiple branches of government and legal experts. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell spent hours with investigators, helping to create a comprehensive catalog of the stolen items and their historical significance. For many of the pieces, she was one of the few people alive who could testify to their provenance and importance to British heritage. The process of documenting what had been lost was emotionally exhausting, as each item represented not just monetary value, but irreplaceable cultural history. As dawn broke over London, the full scope of the investigation began to emerge. What had started as concerns about a few missing artifacts had revealed the largest theft of royal property in modern history. The betrayal went beyond mere criminal activity. It represented a fundamental violation of the trust that formed the basis of the monarchy's relationship with the British people. Sarah Mitchell stood in her office, looking out at a London that would soon wake up to news that would shake the very foundations of the British establishment. The evidence was overwhelming, the case was strong, but she knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The investigation had uncovered the crimes, but the consequences would reverberate through British society for years to come. The stolen artifacts represented more than their monetary value. They were tangible links to centuries of British history, items that had been worn by queens and kings that had survived wars and revolutions that connected the current royal family to their ancestors. The thought that these irreplaceable pieces of heritage might be scattered in private collections around the world was heartbreaking for everyone involved in the investigation. As the morning news prepared to break the story that would dominate headlines around the world, the investigation team knew that their work had only just begun. The arrests were just the first step in a legal process that would test the very foundations of the British legal system and the monarchy itself. The custody suite at Paddington Green Police Station had processed many high-profile suspects over the years, but nothing had prepared the staff for the arrival of Queen Consort Camilla Parker Bowles. The booking process, normally routine, became an exercise in unprecedented protocol as officers struggled to balance legal requirements with the constitutional implications of arresting a member of the royal family. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell watched through the observation window as Camilla sat in the interview room, her royal composure beginning to crack under the weight of the evidence presented to her. The woman who had spent decades fighting for acceptance and respect within the royal family now faced the possibility of destroying everything she had worked to build. Her solicitor, one of London's most prominent criminal defense attorneys, sat beside her reviewing the mountain of evidence that the prosecution had assembled. The first formal interview began at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. with cameras recording every word for what would undoubtedly become one of the most significant legal proceedings in British history. Sarah had conducted thousands of interviews during her career, but nothing had prepared her for the surreal experience of questioning someone whose face appeared on currency and postage stamps. Camilla's initial strategy was complete denial, claiming that she had no knowledge of any missing royal artifacts and suggesting that the evidence had been fabricated by people who opposed her position within the royal family. Her performance was convincing, drawing on decades of experience dealing with hostile media and skeptical public opinion. However, as Sarah methodically presented piece after piece of documentary evidence, Camilla's confidence began to waver. The breakthrough came when Sarah presented the financial records showing direct deposits into Camilla's personal bank accounts from Helena Thornfield's auction house. The amounts corresponded exactly with the sale dates and values of specific royal artifacts, creating a paper trail that was impossible to explain away. Faced with this irrefutable evidence, Camilla's demeanor shifted from indignation to resignation. Helena Thornfield, being interviewed simultaneously in another room, provided crucial testimony that corroborated the police theory of the case. Her cooperation with investigators was complete, driven by both legal necessity and genuine remorse for her unwitting role in the theft of British cultural heritage. Helena's detailed records of her interactions with Camilla painted a picture of systematic deception spanning several months. The auction specialist described receiving initial contact from someone claiming to represent Camilla's private estate matters. The caller had provided impeccable credentials and documentation, leading Helena to believe she was handling the legitimate sale of personal items that Camilla had inherited or been given as gifts. The sophistication of the deception became clear as Helena recounted how authentication documents and provenance papers had been provided for each item. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell found herself at the center of the media storm as news of the arrest leaked to the press. Her role as the whistleblower who had initiated the investigation made her a target for both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed her as a hero who had protected British heritage, while critics suggested she had betrayed the royal family that had employed her for decades. The personal toll of her decision was evident as she struggled with death threats and character assassination attempts. The international implications of the case became clear as investigators worked with law enforcement agencies around the world to track down artifacts that had been sold to overseas collectors. Interpol issued alerts for dozens of pieces, while diplomatic channels were activated to request cooperation from governments whose citizens might have unknowingly purchased stolen royal property. Marcus Weatherby's antique dealership became a focal point for media attention as reporters sought to understand how stolen royal artifacts had entered the legitimate art market. His cooperation with police had been essential to the investigation, but the publicity threatened to destroy the business reputation he had spent 40 years building. The irony that his professional integrity had led him to expose the very crimes that now threatened his livelihood was not lost on him. King Charles III faced the most difficult period of his reign as he grappled with the personal and constitutional implications of his wife's arrest. Palace sources described the monarch as devastated, struggling to balance his personal loyalty to Camilla with his duty to the crown and the British people. The crisis threatened to undermine his legitimacy at a time when the monarchy was already facing questions about its relevance and cost to taxpayers. The legal team assembled to prosecute the case represented some of Britain's most experienced criminal lawyers, led by Queen's Counsel Victoria Sterling, whose expertise in high-profile fraud cases made her the obvious choice to lead the prosecution. Sterling understood that the case would set precedents for how the British legal system handled crimes involving the royal family, making every decision crucial for future constitutional law. As the investigation expanded, additional arrests were made among palace staff and associates who had assisted in the theft ring. These included a longtime valet who had provided inside information about security procedures, a personal assistant who had helped forge documentation, and a transportation coordinator who had facilitated the removal of items from royal properties. Each arrest revealed new layers of the conspiracy and deepened the betrayal felt by loyal palace employees. The emotional impact on Queen Elizabeth II's surviving family members was profound. Princess, and known for her straightforward manner and devotion to duty, publicly expressed her disgust at the betrayal of her mother's memory. Prince William and Catherine faced the challenge of protecting their children from the media circus while dealing with their own feelings of anger and disappointment. The recovery operation for stolen artifacts became a global effort as investigators worked to trace items that had been sold to collectors around the world. Each recovered piece represented not just returned property, but a small victory in preserving British heritage. However, some items had already been resold multiple times, making recovery extremely difficult and highlighting the lasting damage caused by the theft ring. Dr. Hartwell worked tirelessly with investigators to create a comprehensive catalog of missing items and their historical significance. Her expertise was crucial in distinguishing between items that belonged to the Crown estate and those that had been Queen Elizabeth II's personal property. The process revealed the true scope of the theft, which far exceeded initial estimates, and included some of the most historically significant pieces in the royal collection. The media coverage of the case dominated international headlines as news organizations struggled to report on a story that challenged traditional deference to the royal family. The balance between public interest and respect for the monarchy created ethical dilemmas for journalists, while the legal restrictions on reporting an ongoing criminal case limited what could be published. Public opinion polls showed a nation divided in its response to the scandal. Longtime supporters of the monarchy expressed shock and disappointment, while Republican sympathizers saw the case as evidence of the institution's fundamental corruption. The impact on tourism and Britain's international reputation became a concern for government officials as the story continued to generate negative headlines. Helena Thornfield's cooperation with investigators provided crucial insights into how stolen artifacts had entered the international art market. Her testimony revealed a sophisticated network of dealers and collectors who specialized in high-value items with questionable provenance. The complexity of the money laundering operation became clear as investigators followed financial trails through multiple bank accounts, offshore entities, and shell companies. The sophistication of the financial arrangements suggested professional assistance in concealing the proceeds of the thefts. As the case progressed toward trial, the defense team began preparing strategies that would challenge not just the evidence, but the very authority of civilian courts to prosecute a member of the royal family. Constitutional questions about royal immunity and the relationship between the crown and the legal system became central to the defense strategy, potentially creating a constitutional crisis that could reshape British governance. The international art community watched the case with intense interest as it highlighted vulnerabilities in the authentication and provenance verification processes that govern high-value art sales. The scandal prompted calls for reform in how auction houses verified the ownership of valuable artifacts, particularly those with potential royal or state connections. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell's testimony before a parliamentary committee investigating the security of royal collections provided damning insights into the systematic weaknesses that had allowed the thefts to occur. Her recommendations for improved security and oversight procedures were adopted immediately, but the damage to public confidence in the royal family stewardship of national heritage had already been done. The recovery efforts led by Detective Sergeant Crawford resulted in the return of approximately 60% of the stolen artifacts, though many of the most valuable pieces remained missing. Each recovered item required careful authentication and restoration, as some had been damaged during their time in private collections. The process of returning items to the royal collection became a symbol of the monarchy's attempt to rebuild trust with the British people. As the trial date approached, the prosecution team faced the challenge of presenting a case that would satisfy legal requirements while respecting the constitutional sensitivities involved in prosecuting royalty. The evidence was overwhelming, but the political and constitutional implications of a conviction remained unclear, creating pressure for a plea agreement that might avoid a trial altogether. The Old Bailey had hosted many historic trials during its centuries of operation, but none had generated the international attention focused on Regina versus Parker Bowles and others. The constitutional paradox of the Crown prosecuting the Queen Consort created unprecedented legal challenges that required consultation with constitutional experts from across the Commonwealth. Every aspect of the trial, from jury selection to courtroom security, required careful consideration of the unique circumstances surrounding the case. Queen's Counsel Victoria Sterling stood before the packed courtroom as she delivered her opening statement, outlining a case that would shake the foundations of public trust in the monarchy. Her presentation was methodical and devastating, walking the jury through evidence that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning months and involving some of Britain's most precious cultural artifacts. The weight of prosecuting a member of the royal family was evident in her measured tone and careful choice of words. Camilla Parker Bowles entered the dock wearing a simple black suit, her usual jewelry absent except for her wedding ring. The transformation from queen consort to criminal defendant was jarring for observers who had grown accustomed to seeing her at state functions and royal ceremonies. Her legal team, led by Sir Geoffrey Hawthorne QC, one of Britain's most accomplished criminal defense barristers, faced the nearly impossible task of mounting a credible defense against overwhelming evidence. The prosecution's case began with testimony from Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, whose expertise and moral courage had initiated the investigation. Her testimony was emotionally charged as she described discovering the systematic disappearance of artifacts that represented centuries of British heritage. Under cross-examination, the defense attempted to portray her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but her impeccable professional reputation and detailed documentation made such attacks ineffective. His emotional testimony about witnessing pieces of British heritage being sold to private collectors highlighted the cultural significance of the crimes beyond their monetary value. His expertise in royal provenance made his testimony particularly compelling for the jury. The defense strategy centered on portraying Camilla as a victim of manipulation by more sophisticated criminals within her household staff. Sir Geoffrey argued that his client had been deceived by trusted advisors who had convinced her that the sales were legitimate disposals of personal gifts rather than thefts of crown property. This narrative required careful presentation to avoid suggesting that Camilla was incompetent or easily manipulated. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell's testimony provided the investigative backbone of the prosecution's case. Her methodical presentation of evidence and her professional demeanor under aggressive cross-examination demonstrated the thoroughness of the police investigation. The defense's attempts to suggest investigative bias or procedural irregularities were unsuccessful in the face of her detailed documentation and transparent methodology. The courtroom drama was intensified by the presence of royal family members in the public gallery. Prince William and Catherine attended several sessions, their expressions conveying the personal pain caused by Camilla's betrayal. Their presence served as a powerful reminder that the victims of these crimes included not just the British people, but the royal family itself. King Charles III's absence from the trial proceedings was notable and politically significant. Constitutional experts debated whether his attendance would be appropriate or whether it would create additional legal complications. His written statement, read to the court, expressed his shock and disappointment at the betrayal of trust, while carefully avoiding any language that might influence the jury's deliberations. The testimony of palace staff members who had assisted in the theft ring provided heartbreaking insights into how trusted employees had been corrupted. Their descriptions of the planning and execution of the thefts revealed a level of betrayal that went far beyond simple criminal activity.